used to attend Mass every Sunday at a church when I was a teen, 16 to 17 years. Since then, it's become abandoned, and I'm now 28 years old. My family was incredibly religious, and we always made the effort to attend. My dad worked at his church, but I always dreaded going there. Me being so reluctant about attending, I would often fight and argue with my parents about how pointless church was, and I'd rather spend that Sunday hanging out with my friends. It had gotten to the point where my parents were so fed up with my behavior that they made me volunteer at this church every day after grade school. They figured if I was there more often, it would make me appreciate Mass and not take it for granted. After a few paranormal experiences there, I guess you could say they were right, and that their tactic definitely worked. I'll start with the most significant tales. A lot of times, I would be working alone with my dad. Attached to the chapel that we attended was a school. The school was built in 1898 and was later added onto the chapel, which was built in 1889. At the school, I had the most exciting job on the planet, to mop and clean every single floor in the entire building, while my dad was in his office at the other end of the building. After I'd finished with the school, I had to go into the chapel and mop the floors as well. Of course, I'd always hear the typical cliche ghost noises, the sounds of doors opening and closing, the sounds of voices calling my name here and there. Nothing too alarming. It didn't happen too often, and it was so subtle. It wasn't anything I thought of too much. I always just assumed that I was tired and was hearing things. That was until one night, I was mopping in the hallway at the other end of the building, and I could have sworn I heard chanting coming from the chapel, like you would hear at a Mass when a priest would give a sermon. Only these were very short chants, but it sounded like multiple people talking at once. It was quiet and muffled, but still loud enough that you could clearly hear it. It sounded like Gregorian chants, to be precise. Terrified, I raced to the office so I could ask my dad if anyone was in the church. He said nobody was in the church, and the lights were off. After that experience, I was a little on edge, but I knew that was only the beginning. There was a moment where I had to go to the bathroom to clean the toilets, and as soon as I walked into the bathroom, I felt a cold chill behind my neck. I turned around, and I swear I saw some sort of foggy mist scurry out of the bathroom and disappear. Then, I heard the sound of something rustling in the janitor's closet right after, just outside the bathroom door. In the school hallway, I would sometimes hear knocking sounds, as if someone were trying to get into the school. It was always short and quick knocks, never anything lengthy. Remember, I'm working the floors alone. My dad was always in the office, with the door shut at the other end of the building. It was ridiculously creepy, but it gets worse. I remember one night, around 8 p.m., my dad had to leave the church and school to go pick up my mom from work. She worked at a hospital. I was 18. At this point, my dad trusted me enough to work alone. Haven't been doing this for a couple years now. He was going to come back anyway, but I really didn't want to be alone. I had gotten into my evening routine of mopping the school, then proceeded to go to the chapel. What happened next is something I will never forget for the rest of my life. Before I opened the door to get inside the chapel, I heard the organ inside the church making noises. Remember, my dad had left to pick up my mom, and nobody else was in the church, nor the school. I started freaking out. It was seriously the creepiest thing ever. I walked into the chapel, even though I didn't want to, turned on the lights, and all was quiet. Just before I left, the lights turned off, and I heard a moan. At the moment, I didn't even hesitate. I raced out of the chapel and waited outside of the school and chapel until my dad came back. I absolutely refused to step foot inside those buildings ever again. My dad came back, and I asked him if I could please be relieved of my duties and never come back. He told me that I've volunteered here for a while now. I'm getting older, and I've had enough. I never went back to that place ever again. Today, sometimes I'll drive by where that church is, and I'll always be reminded of those things that happened all those nights ago. Okay, I've always considered myself sensitive, but after these experiences, I really started to notice the paranormal. I moved into my grandparents' house about a year after my grandfather died. It was not long after that when we also lost my grandmother. I guess my grandmother couldn't take the pain of losing her lifelong mate, and she was found dead in her bed the very next day. Well, anyway, when I moved in with my parents, I had the last pick of rooms, and I was given the middle room, the same room my grandfather died in. Even worse, I was also given the same bed that both my grandparents passed away in. I always felt kind of uncomfortable in that room, and I had this feeling like I was never really alone in there. It wasn't a bad feeling, but very unsettling. Late one night, I was sleeping in that same bed when I suddenly was awoken by a soft whispering that came from the closet. The closet door was left half open, and that was the moment when I partially saw my grandfather. I didn't see his full body, just his head. He looked as if he was smiling, and his head was peeking out of the half-open closet. I managed to turn on the light for a second, just to make sure my eyes weren't playing tricks on me, but he was gone. It felt like it lasted forever, but in reality, it had to be about 15 seconds. That wasn't the end of the night, though. I turned off the light, went to bed for an hour, when I was awakened yet again. This time, I was a little frightened, because the closet door was fully open now. How it even managed to swing open by itself, I'll never know, but I saw something. This time, it wasn't my grandfather. It was a nun. She was dressed in all black, and looked like she was from the Victorian era. This wasn't the last night I spent in that room, and this was only one of the many occasions I happened to hear and see my grandfather. 2 days later, I slept in that same room again. At the time, I was really close to my cousin, so she always spent the night. One night, she woke me up and took me to look in the closet. She looked absolutely horrified and was hysterical. She said she knew the closet door was closed when we were asleep, but somehow managed to pry itself open. She told me she saw a full-bodied hooded figure just standing in the closet for about 10 seconds. That's when she yelled for me to wake up. I didn't end up seeing anything, but we both heard tapping noises continuously in the closet for the rest of that night. For the next few days, I would constantly hear the sounds of footsteps that I always assumed was my grandfather's in the middle of the night. This wouldn't be so bad, except for the fact that the footsteps are never quiet. They are extremely loud. Every time I'm awakened, I end up wide awake and can never go back to bed immediately. I wish this didn't affect me still, but it still does. Even though the presence of my grandfather always felt comforting, I couldn't stop to think about the other ghostly residents that resided in the house. The cloaked figure my cousin witnessed, the nun I saw in the closet. There was something much more sinister in that house, and I knew it could only get worse, though it seemed as though my grandfather was protecting me from these spirits. There was a moment where I was standing in the kitchen doing dishes, and I heard the back door open and close. I heard the footsteps moving up the steps and stopped at the door of the kitchen. I stopped what I was doing. Thinking that my cousin had come to see me, I looked up and waited for her to come through the door. I went to look, and there was nobody there. I closed the door and I went back to doing the dishes. The funny thing was, in that moment, I felt the presence of a figure beside me. Keep in mind, the hair on the back of my neck had started to stand on end when the door opened. Not 2 minutes later, I heard the back door open and the whole ordeal started over. This time, I ran to the entranceway and there was no one there. I was in hysterics. I ran to my room, grabbed the phone, and called my friend Sarah. I asked her if she had some free time to spend with me because I needed to get out of the house. I hung up the phone and listened. There it was again, except this time, the footsteps didn't stop at the kitchen door. They continued through the kitchen, into the hall, to the door of my room. I felt the room get really cold. This is where my sensitivity kicked in. I had this overwhelming feeling of fear, and not so far under the surface, a lot of anger. It came into the room, and though I couldn't see it, it backed me up into the corner of my room. I was about to start screaming when I heard Sarah's tires in the gravel in the driveway. It must have heard my rescuer too, because I could feel it withdraw. At the time, I hadn't noticed a drop in temperature, but when Sarah came running into my room, it looked like she hit a wall. She froze at the door, looked at me cowering in the corner, and asked how long ago it left. I couldn't speak. I just stood there, shaking. Later on, when I was safely at her house, she told me that the room felt like it was about 50 degrees in there. We came to the conclusion that we had to find some way to get this thing to leave me alone. After one trip to the local herb shop and a large chain bookstore, we had come to the conclusion that I had to demand that if it was going to live with me, it had to stop harassing me. Well, not 5 days later, I was once again standing over the sink with the hair on the back of my neck and arm stood up, and I felt a hand reach out and touch my shoulder. I spun around and started yelling. Well, maybe screaming at it is a better description. I told it that it was not allowed to touch me or sneak up on me. Well, it must have listened, because from that day on, it never tried to intimidate me again, although he has started whispering something incoherent that I constantly really don't understand. Unfortunately, it sounds muffled, like if you leave a TV on in a room and close the door. It still continues to whisper. I worked closely with a man in his mid-50s. He was very special to me. He was diagnosed with a severe illness and underwent a liver transplant, survived the surgery, but never regained consciousness. A couple of years later, I was racing some movies to the video store, and as someone who naturally flies, I was on my way back and still in my racing mood. We lived about 4 miles out this long, dark, curvy at times road in Samara, Tennessee, just south of Nashville. I was in my car by myself, and as I approached the worst curve on the road, the smell filled my car. Instantly, I knew the smell, but couldn't place it. I slowed down and looked around the car as best I could. I remember looking in my rear view in the back seat a couple times, still trying to recall where I knew that smell. I looked through my rear view mirror for a split second, and I could have sworn I saw the face of a man. But before I could get a detailed look, it was gone. As for the smell, I rolled down my window to see if it was coming from the outside. It wasn't. Just past the curve, the thought hit me where I knew the smell from. My friend, Jim, my coworker and mentor who had died, had been on some very strong medicines before his death. The meds created an odor around him when you were near, and his breath had a certain smell that I'm sure was induced by the medicine. The smell that I smelt in my car was exactly this. I'd never smelt it before, nor after his death. Then the thought, clear as a bell, came to me. Jim had come to slow me down on that curve. I swear to this day, needless to say, it was scary, and I raced the rest of the way home. That night as I lay in bed, I remember looking up in the four corners of the room, saying, "Jim, are you here?" I didn't really think so, because that smell had dissipated just around the curve. To this day, almost 14 years later, I've never encountered it again. I know without a doubt the smell, as it was burned into my memories of Jim. After it was over, I remember thinking, "Jim, come back. I would love to talk to you," but never had another experience. This is the first time this story's ever been told to anyone outside of her family, so I hope that everyone finds it as interesting and chilling as me and my family have. It all started about 2 years ago, when I stayed the night with my sister in her new house in northeastern Texas. I was lying on her couch, watching TV, when out of the corner of my eye, I saw someone standing behind me. They were wearing a gray sweatshirt. I just assumed it was my sister and said hi. I then turned back around, and there was no one there, so I went into my sister's room to see if she wanted anything, and she was in the shower. I freaked out, so I sat in her room until she got out of the shower. I didn't say anything to her about it, because I was afraid she would be scared, since she was often home alone, as her husband is a truck driver. 2 weeks after this incident, my sister and husband came to our house for a visit. As my brother-in-law was talking to my father, he mentioned that he would be lying in his bed sometimes, and out of the corner of his eye, he will see someone in a gray sweater standing at the bar in the kitchen, and when he gets up to investigate further, he finds no one in the entire house. My father told him and my sister that I had seen the same thing, but it seemed to scare my brother-in-law more than it did my sister. On another visit, me and my niece fell asleep on the living room floor, watching TV. My niece had been long asleep when I began to hear a creaking noise, and due to the previous incident, I automatically decided that it was the rocking chair recliner rocking by itself. I was honestly scared to death. I'm 16, and I was afraid to turn around and look. After trying forever to wake my niece, she finally woke up. I explained to her the situation and told her to run as fast as she could to her mother's bedroom. I also followed, and as I was going out, I happened to look back, and I was right. The chair was rocking very fast and by itself. A few weeks later, the man who owns my sister's home came by and wanted to know if she would like to buy the entire house instead of just renting. He then told her the house has just too many bad memories for me. My sister also found out later in the same week that the owner's son had fallen off of the back of a tractor and into the tractor discs and died in our backyard, and there is still an old tractor disc and many very old children's bicycles behind her shop. There are 2 rooms in the house that every time me or my other sister, who lives in Arkansas, go in them, we get this strange feeling of being watched and or followed, and the room always has a damp feeling to it. If anyone has any questions, they can email me. Hope you enjoyed this story. Hello, my name is John. I live in Lake Worth, Florida, have for all my life. I've had so many unexplained experiences since my youth, but first, I want you to know that I'm a Christian and will not deceive you or anyone to the facts I'm going to tell you. It's up to you, but to me it's real and has actually happened. But the one I want to tell you about happened in 1989. I'd gotten a divorce in 1988. I moved back to my mother's house. I'm 47 years old now. My bedroom was my mother's couch, which rests facing north to south. The front of the house faces east, and to the back of the house faces west. One night, as I lay sleeping, my brother's dog began to bark a lot, then stopped. Having woken up because of this, I thought maybe a person was passing by, as they sometimes do in the neighborhood. As I was about to go into sleep, I must have been in between sleep and awake, as my eyes wandered to the side door of my mother's house, which could be seen, for my pillow was in the north position. The door leads to the car part facing north, the north door. Through this door came a spirit of a girl who came to my head position. All I saw was a glowing outline of a girl, whose hair was short. I sensed that I knew her. I honestly thought that was so weird. She went back through the door in which she came in, and the strangest thing happened. My brother's dog started barking and chasing the apparition as it was leaving out of the door. I heard that dogs can sense or even see things we can't, but I know that this was real. I had the feeling I knew this person at one point, and that was the strangest thing ever. I know I just mentioned that, but I can't get over that fact. In the end, I had no further contact with the spirit, but one thing is for sure, this spirit definitely knew me. I have a feeling that you're getting a Friday night upload, and I can't believe you're here. Well, it could be Saturday, with my internet connection being so crappy. But hey guys, comment, like, share, and subscribe. No, seriously guys, thank you so much for tuning in again. I'm finally on time. I'm finally getting 2 videos out for the week, and the weekend of course, so that's amazing for me. Guys, I love you so much, and I wanted to say from the bottom of my heart that apocalypse has consumed my soul, and I'm no longer a human. I'm actually sitting out on Crybaby Bridge, and I'm just kind of crying because, the apocalypse has stripped me of all my cash, and now not even an ad can save my own life. Guys, I'm kidding. Anyway, guys, please let me know in the comment section below what you thought of all these stories. I'd say the first story with the church was my favorite, personally. I kind of been hyping it up on my social media accounts, so you guys know that I really love the story and I was excited to share it with you guys. But really, guys, I gotta go, and I'll just say goodnight. So, good night, guys. I love you so much, and I'll see you in the next video. It's good to be on time again. I love that feeling. Bye-bye.